as the promising material to do both, to be retained in the body without rejection and to be able to retain information retrievable by electronic means. Food. Food supply would come under tight control. If population growth didn't slow down, food shortages could be created in a hurry, and people would realize the dangers of overpopulation. Ultimately, whether the population slows down or not, though, the food supply is to be brought under centralized control so that people would have enough to be well nourished, but they would not have enough to support any fugitive from the new system. In other words, if you had a friend or relative who didn't sign on, and growing one's own food would be outlawed. This would be done under some sort of pretext. In the beginning, I mentioned there were two purposes for everything. One, the ostensible purpose, and two, the real purpose. And an ostensible purpose here would be that growing your own vegetables was unsafe, it would spread disease or something like that. So the acceptable idea was to protect the consumer, but the real idea is to limit the food supply, and growing your own food would be illegal. And if you persist in illegal activities like growing food, then you're a criminal. There was a mention then of weather, W-E-A-T-H-E-R. This was another really striking statement. He said, "We can, or soon will be able to control the weather." He said, "I'm not merely referring to dropping iodide crystals into clouds to precipitate rain that's already there, but real control." And weather was seen as a weapon of war, a weapon of influencing public policy. You could make rain or withhold rain in order to influence certain areas and bring them under your control. There were two sides to this that were kind of striking. He said, on the one hand, you can make drought during the growing season so that nothing will grow, and on the other hand, you can make for very heavy rains during the harvest seasons so that the fields are too muddy to bring in the harvest, and indeed one might be able to do both. There was no statement how this would be done. It was stated that it was either already possible or very, very close to being possible. Politics. He said, very few people know how government really works. Something to the effect that elected officials are influenced in ways that they don't even realize. And they carry out plans that have been made for them, and they think they are that they are authors of the plans. But actually they've been, are manipulated in ways that they don't understand. Somewhere in the presentation he made two statements that I want to insert at this time. I don't remember just where they were made, but they're valid as in terms of the general overall view. The one statement, people can carry in their minds and act upon two contradictory ideas at the same time, provided these two contradictory ideas are kept far enough apart. And the other one, the other statement is, you can know pretty well how rational people are going to respond to certain circumstances or to certain information that they encounter. So to determine the response you want, you need only control the kind of data or information that they are presented or the kinds of circumstances they're in. And being rational people, they'll do what you want them to do. They may not fully understand what they're doing or why. Somewhere in this connection then was a statement admitting that some scientific research data could be, and indeed has been, falsified in order to bring about desired results. And here it was said, people don't ask the right questions. Some people are too trusting. Now, this was an interesting statement because the speaker and the audience, all being doctors of medicine and supposedly very objectively, dispassionately scientific, and science being the be-all and end-all, well, to falsify data, scientific research data, in that setting is like blasphemy in the church. You just don't do that. Anyhow, out of all of this was to on the political scene was to come the new international governing body, probably to come through the UN and with the World Court, but not necessarily through those structures. It could be brought about in other ways. Acceptance of the UN at that time was seen as not being as wide as had been hoped. Efforts would continue to give the United Nations increasing importance. People would be more and more used to the idea of relinquishing some national sovereignty. Economic interdependence would foster this goal from a peaceful standpoint. Avoidance of war would foster it from the standpoint of worrying about hostilities. It was recognized that doing it peaceably was better than doing it by war. It was stated at this point that war is obsolete. And I thought that was an interesting phrase because obsolete means something that once was seen as useful is no longer useful. But war is obsolete, this being because of the nuclear bombs. War is no longer controllable. Formerly, wars could be controlled, but if nuclear weapons would fall into the wrong hands, there could be an unintended nuclear disaster. It was not stated who the wrong hands are. We were free to infer that maybe this meant terrorists, but in more recent years I'm wondering whether the wrong hands might also include people that we've assumed have had nuclear weapons all along. Maybe they don't have them. Just as it was stated that industry would be preserved in the United States a little bit, just in case the worldwide plans didn't work out, just in case some country or some other powerful person decided to bolt from the pack and go his own way. One wonders whether this might also be true with nuclear weapons. When you hear that he said they might fall into the wrong hands, there was some statement that the possession of nuclear weapons has been tightly controlled, sort of implying that anybody who had nuclear weapons was intended to have them. That would necessarily have included the Soviet Union, if indeed they have them. But I recall at the time of wondering, are you telling us or are you implying that that this country willingly gave nuclear weapons to the Soviets? At that time, that seemed like a terribly unthinkable thing to do, much less to admit. The leaders of the Soviet Union seemed to be so dependent on the West, though. One wonders whether there might have been some fear that they would try to assert independence if they indeed had these weapons. So, I don't know. It's something to speculate about, perhaps. Who did he mean when he said if these weapons fall into the wrong hands? Maybe just terrorists. We'll see. Anyhow, the new system would be brought in, if not by peaceful cooperation, everybody willingly yielding national sovereignty, then by bringing the nation to the brink of nuclear war. And everybody would be so fearful as hysteria was created about the possibility of nuclear war that there would be a strong public outcry to negotiate a peace, and people would willingly give up national sovereignty in order to achieve peace, and thereby this would bring in the new international political system. This was stated, and a very impressive thing to hear then. If there were too many people in the right places who resisted this, there might be a need to use one or two, possibly more nuclear weapons. As it was put, this would be possibly needed to convince people that we mean business. And that was followed with a statement that by the time one or two of those went off, then everybody, even the most reluctant, would yield. He said something about this negotiated peace would be very convincing. This kind of in a framework or in a context that the whole thing was rehearsed, but nobody would know it. People hearing about it would be convinced that it was a genuine negotiation between hostile enemies who finally had come to the realization that peace was better than war. In this context, discussing war and war is obsolete, a statement was made that there were some good things about war. One, you're going to die anyway, and people sometimes in war get a chance to display great courage and heroism, and if they die, they've died well, and if they survive, they get recognition. So that in any case, the hardships of war on the soldiers are worth it, because that's the reward they get out of their warring. Another justification for war expressed was, if you think of the many millions of casualties in World War I and World War II, well, suppose all those people had not died but continued to live and continued to have babies. There would be millions upon millions, and we would already be overpopulated. So those two great wars served a benign purpose in delaying overpopulation. But now there are technological means for the individual and governments to control overpopulation. So in this regard, war is obsolete. It's no longer needed. And then it's, again, it's obsolete because nuclear weapons could destroy the whole universe. War which once was controllable could get out of control. And so for these two reasons, it's now obsolete. There was a discussion of terrorism. Terrorism would be used widely in Europe and other parts of the world. Terrorism at that time was felt would not be necessary in the United States. It possibly could become necessary if the United States did not move rapidly enough into accepting the system. But at least in the foreseeable future, it was not planned, and very benignly on their part. Maybe terrorism would not be required here, but the implication being that it would be indeed used if it was necessary. Along with this came a little bit of a scolding that Americans have had it too good anyway, and just a little bit of terrorism would help convince Americans that the world indeed is a dangerous place, or can be if we don't relinquish control to the proper authorities. There was discussion of money and banking. One statement was inflation is infinite. You can put an infinite number of zeros after any number and put the decimal points wherever you want. This is an indication that inflation is a tool of controllers. Money would become predominantly credit. It was already money is primarily a credit thing, but exchange of money would be not cash or palpable things, but electronic credit signals. People would carry money only in very small amounts for things like chewing gum and candy bars, just pocket sorts of things. Any purchase of any significant amount would be done electronically. Earnings would be electronically entered into your account. There would be a single banking system. It may have the appearance of being more than one, but ultimately, basically, it would be one single banking system. So that when you got paid, your pay would be entered for you into your account balance, and then when you purchased anything at the point of purchase, it would be deducted from your account balance, and you would actually carry nothing with you. Also, computer records can be kept of whatever it was you purchased, so that if you were purchasing too much of any particular item, some official wanted to know what you were doing with your money, they could go back and review your purchase